Hello and welcome back to my channel. I am so excited to film this video. Today we are talking about the best books that I read in 2023. So I've never filmed one of these videos before and I actually got quite stressed out when I was trying to pick a top 10. I picked out my top 10 worst books pretty easily, like they came to me quite easily, even though they weren't even that bad, a lot of them, but they were kind of much more obvious to me. And then when I sat down and tried to do a top 10, I realised I just couldn't do it. They're too difficult to compare. So what I've done instead is I have done a top 5, but I've also done categories and then kind of nominations within those categories. So some of them are genre categories like best non-fiction or best classic or best children's book. Then I've also done things like best new author and best character, best vibe kind of thing. So without further ado, let's get started because we have a lot to go through today. I'm going to start off by doing categories and then I'm going to end the video doing my top 5 books from 2023. And I cannot wait to share these with you because these are all excellent books. And I can wholeheartedly say that you should read any one of the books that I'm mentioning today. I can't wait to share with you the best books that I read in 2023, but also I would love to know what your favourite books that you read this year were. So please let me know down in a comment. Do a top 3, or if you want, you could do the same categories that I've done and tell me your winner for each category because I would love to know. The more detail the better because I love getting recommendations. But with all that said, we're going to jump into our first category, which is the best classic that I read in 2023. So for this category, I have 3 nominations and they are Slaughterhouse-Five, which is an American classic, but honestly I don't want to tell you too much about the plot of this book or even the genre because it was such a surprise to me and it's one of the reasons why I absolutely loved it. The next nomination for this category is East of Eden, which tells the story about 2 different families, and the last nomination is a novella by Jane Austen, which is Lady Susan. This story focuses on Lady Susan, who after getting into some relationship drama at her previous place of residence, moves in with her brother-in-law and causes even more drama. So while all 3 of these books are classics, they are very different. Lady Susan is funny, it's very witty, it focuses on a very unlikable main character and it's a short novella. Then there's Slaughterhouse-Five, that is just a wild ride from the first page. Also much more of an experimental classic than I was expecting. And then there's East of Eden, which is a long and slow story that follows a family over generations. It's slow and it's sad and it's a story that tries to encapsulate the truths of being alive and being human, and it is a much more challenging book to read, but probably for that reason, it is my winner for this category. So East of Eden is the best classic that I read this year and I absolutely loved it. It's now got a place in my heart and also on my favourite shelf. It's by far the best Steinbeck that I've ever read and I would implore you to pick up this book. It can be very slow going, but I honestly think that this is one of those books that if you give the time to and you sit with and read it slowly, it will really touch your heart. So that is why East of Eden is my favourite classic that I read in 2023. Next up, I want to talk about the best non-fiction book that I read in 2023. So non-fiction is such a wide category anyway, and I have 3 very different books to talk about today. Firstly, it's When We Cease to Understand the World, which is such a strange little book talking about the geniuses behind some of the biggest scientific inventions of the 21st century. But this book is actually kind of a blend of non-fiction and fiction. It starts off very much non-fiction, focused on these famous men and kind of the blend between their genius and also madness, but by the end of the book it also kind of slightly goes off the rails and leaves the non-fiction aspect behind. But I don't want to say anything more because if you're interested in this topic then you should definitely pick this book up. Next up, I want to talk about a memoir, which is Chanel Miller's Know My Name. So Chanel Miller is the survivor of the Stanford sexual assault case that happened in 2016, and this is Chanel's memoir telling her story about what happened, but also beyond that it's her reflections on life and tragedy and beauty, and it is so beautifully written, but it is a very difficult read. And then the last nomination for this category is Bad Feminist by Roxane Gay, which is a collection of essays. They are funny essays, they focus on pop culture and her musings on life, and in general it's just a really fun read. But the winner out of all of these 3 nominations has to be Know My Name by Chanel Miller. I think this is just such an important read and I really encourage everyone to read it. It's full of beautiful writing and heartbreaking moments, but also I just really think that the strength of her character really comes through in this memoir. So this is the best non-fiction that I read in 2023. So next up, I want to talk about my favourite contemporary or literary fiction of the year. So I have 3 nominations again, so let's go through them. The first nomination is Big Swiss by Jen Beagin. This is a book about Greta, who starts working as a transcriptionist for a therapist, and she becomes very obsessed with one of the therapist's clients, and then she slowly starts trying to find a way to become involved in this client's life, who she calls Big Swiss. The next nomination in this category is Small Worlds by Caleb Azuma Nelson. If you liked Open Water by Caleb Azuma Nelson, then I can guarantee you'll also love Small Worlds. This is another coming of age story that is beautifully and lyrically written, focuses on a young man growing up, finding his place in the world. But for me, the unique writing in this is just what puts it above the rest. And then my final nomination for this category is Bellies by Nicola Danan. This is a story about Ming and Tom, who get into a relationship at the end of university, and it follows their life as they try to settle into their adulthood, getting jobs, settling down, and growing together, growing apart. And it's one of the most unique coming of age stories that I've ever read. So my winner for this category is Bellies. I just loved this book. Something about it was so addictive. I loved the writing and I loved getting to know the characters. I think if you really like Sally Rooney, then you should definitely try this book. I personally like Sally Rooney, but I think that this is the type of book that I was looking for when I pick up a Sally Rooney. That kind of deep character study where you feel really enmeshed in the characters' lives as they're growing up and dealing with different situations. So I absolutely loved Bellies and I implore you to pick it up. So the next category I want to talk about is Best Children's Book, and this is something that I found a lot of joy in reading this year and I want to read a lot more of next year as well. So I have 2 nominations only for this category, the first of which is Moomin. So this is the first Moomin book that I read. This is Moomin Summer Madness. Basically, the Moomin books just follow this family of Moomins, and the stories are just quite unhinged but in a really fun, playful, whimsical way, but also very deep, and they really hit you in the heart. So I definitely want to read more Moomin next year. And then the other nomination is A Series of Unfortunate Events. I've been doing a reread this year. It's been so much fun and I've absolutely loved it. These are about the story of 3 siblings who become orphans at the beginning of the series, and it's basically them trying to escape a very evil man called Count Olaf who wants their fortune. But out of these 2 nominations, I have to give the winner to A Series of Unfortunate Events because these are just making me feel so nostalgic. I read them as a child and I've loved reading them again now, and I've also realised how much these books have encouraged my own love of reading when I read them when I was young. I love their cleverness and their vocabulary, and they still surprise me with every book, so it's so much fun, and this is my winner. So my next category is my favourite new to me author. Firstly, we have S.T. Gibson, who wrote A Dowry of Blood and other books that I cannot wait to get to. Second nomination goes to Heather Fawcett, who wrote Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. And then the final nomination goes to Kimberly Lemming, who wrote the Mead Mishap series, starting with That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Demon. And I absolutely love all 3 of these authors, and I will be reading a lot more of them in 2024. But my personal winner has to go to S.T. Gibson because I cannot wait for the books that she's releasing next year as well. They just sound absolutely perfect, and I adored A Dowry of Blood. I think she handles the dark and lyrical prose and also romance and tension really well, and I just cannot wait to keep reading from her in 2024. So my next category that I want to talk about is Best Character. So these are any character from any book that I've read this year, and the first nomination goes to Demon Copperhead from Demon Copperhead. Demon is why I loved reading this book so much. He roots the story so well. He has a really dry wit and humour, but also so much heart and cleverness, and he was the reason that I love this story so much, which, if you don't know, is a modern retelling of David Copperfield set in the Appalachian region in America. I just loved Demon so much. He had such a strength of character, but he was also funny, and I just genuinely cared so much about him and wanted him to get out of every situation that he was in and to have a happy and long and wonderful life. Next up, we have Toadling from Thornhedge. This is a take on a dark fairy tale, and Toadling is one of our main characters. Toadling is a human girl, but she was stolen from her family and brought up in the land of the Fae, which means that even though she's technically human, she is also very Fae. When she grows up, she's told that she has to go back to the land of the humans and complete a mission where she spends most of her time in the shape of a toad, hence her name, Toadling. And I just love Toadling. She is so cute, and I love T. Kingfisher's character work. Usually she always has the most unique characters. This is actually a really short little novel, so I'd really recommend that you pick it up and meet Toadling yourself. And my final nomination is Galadriel, or Elle, from the Sholomance series, which starts with A Deadly Education. I absolutely love these books, but I mainly love them because of Elle. She is basically struggling throughout these books because there was a prophecy about her when she was very young that she would grow up with the potential to have world-shattering magic. She has so much magical potential that she could raise an army of the dead and become queen of the world in her own evil way, but she very much does not want to do that. She just wants to live a quiet life and survive. And I just really loved Elle. I loved reading from her perspective, even the slowest parts of the book where she is just literally telling you how an aspect of the world works were more interesting because it was her own special way of telling you these things, and I just absolutely loved her. I loved her internal monologue. I loved her inner struggle of desperately wanting to be part of a community and having friends, but also by necessity distancing herself from everyone around her. But my winner for this category has to go to Demon Copperhead, because I don't know if I would have got through this very sad and tragic book without him, and I absolutely adored him. So Demon Copperhead is my favourite character from 2023. Okay, so the final category before I get into my top 5 favourite books of the year is Best Vibes, and I don't really know how to describe this other than just the best atmosphere in a book, the book that made me feel like I was really there and it had either something unique about it or it was really well written. And I have 3 nominations for this, so maybe you'll see what kind of vibe I mean by the nominations. One I have already talked about, which is A Dowry of Blood, which is a retelling of Dracula's Brides, and honestly the vibes and the aesthetic of this book are so good and I absolutely loved them. Next up I want to talk about Starling House, which is set in a weird crumbling town where everything is going wrong, and also a lot of the book takes place in a crumbling old gothic mansion that becomes one of the main characters of the book itself. And the final nomination is Vampires of El Norte. This is set in 1840s in Mexico, just by the Mexico-Texan border. This is a story about star-crossed lovers. It's about sinister things in the night. It's a romance, it's historical fiction, it's part horror story, and the vibes are just so good. But I think the winner of this category has to go to Starling House, because to me, you cannot beat a good gothic mansion. I love when it's done well, and in this book it is done so well. Okay, so those are all my categories, nominations and winners. Unfortunately, I did not read enough romance this year to do a romance category on its own, so I really need to step that up in 2024. It's actually something that I'm really going to be focusing on, trying to find romance authors that work for me. So if you have recommendations, please let me know down below. But now it's time to go into my top 5 reads of the year, and I'm so excited to talk about them, but I'm also kind of nervous. Like, it feels really weird having to make a top 5 list. I don't know, I've never done this before, so I'm just going to go into it. It's kind of in no particular order because it depends on the day, it depends on the vibe, it depends on what I'm thinking about where I'm going to place these books. So I'm going to do them in no particular order, but I'm still very excited to tell them to you. And we will start with one that I have already mentioned, which is East of Eden. This has to come top for this year. I just feel like I went on such a journey with this book, and by the end of it I was literally crying. There were just lines that were just written so beautifully that I was fully tearing up and crying by the end of it. It's beautiful. I loved so many of the themes of this book, and I really truly especially loved the theme of it doesn't matter who your parents are or what kind of story is written for you. You can always change, you can always decide to be a good person, and if you have good people around you then it makes that choice so much easier. And just, I don't know, I just absolutely love this book and it has to be in my top 5 of the year. Next up, a book that just snuck in because I only just read this very recently, so it's just snuck in for managing to get to my top 5 of the year, and it is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. I have been looking for a book like this all year and it just fit the bill so perfectly. It was cozy but still interesting. The romance was exciting. I just loved the characters, but let me rewind and tell you what it's about. So this is a story about Emily Wilde, who is writing an encyclopedia of fairies, and she has very almost finished, but she needs to go to one very remote, very cold place in the north to study the fae there to try and finish her encyclopedia. She arrives and she immediately kind of makes a faux pas, and the people in the village really don't like her. So she's wondering how to get their cooperation when her friend and also academic rival also arrives in the town and immediately charms everyone in the village and also pisses off Emily in the process. I loved the dynamic between the 2 main characters. I loved Emily herself. I loved the world that it was built in. People go on a lot about how much they love dark academia, but this is how I feel academic books should really be. It's not dark sparkly academic, it's charming and whimsically academic, and I just absolutely adored it. Emily is so smart and she makes me really care about what she's actually doing, and I just loved the way it was written. It was beautiful and I cannot wait for the second book. I am probably going to start it literally tomorrow, so cannot wait to see what I think of the second one. The next book should be no surprise to anyone who's been paying attention, but it is Tress of the Emerald Sea, which I just got the most beautiful leather-bound edition of for Christmas, and I literally cried when I opened this book. Made me so emotional. I read this book in January and I already knew that it was immediately making it to my favourites list. This is a story about Tress. It is a kind of classic adventure story, but it's got so much heart. If you love The Princess Bride, then this is kind of billed as if Buttercup from The Princess Bride went off on her own adventure and she was the one that did the saving instead. In classic Brandon Sanderson fashion, it's so unique in terms of the world building, but also just so heartwarming with the characters. I just absolutely love this book, and it will definitely be one of my favourite books of all time. But while we are speaking about Brandon Sanderson, he does have 2 places on my top 5 list, because the next book that I want to talk about is Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. I feel like I haven't talked about this enough since I read it, so this is another one of the Brandon Sanderson secret projects. Tress came out in January, and then the third secret project was Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, and oh my god, this one, it's very different to Tress, but it really hit me in the heart. This one, I was crying by the end of it. It was so beautiful. So this story, you're following 2 characters, Yumi and also the Nightmare Painter, and they live in very different worlds. Yumi lives in a place of control and meditation, where she spends a lot of her time in quiet contemplation, but she also expresses herself through art, which is the art of stacking stones. By contrast, though, you have the Nightmare Painter, who lives in a world of darkness and technology, and he takes to the streets at night to paint the nightmares, to keep them at bay and keep the rest of the city safe. Through some strange twist of fate, these 2 characters meet each other and explore each other's worlds, and it is so beautiful. I would say if you liked the movie Your Name, or if you like any of the Final Fantasy video games, then you will really love this book. I would say it's probably not the best place to start with Brandon Sanderson, maybe not the most easy introduction to fantasy as a genre if you haven't read much fantasy before, but if you've been putting off reading this book and it sounds interesting to you, absolutely pick it up, because it is so good. It was so beautiful. I had my heart in my throat for so much of this book. It's a lot more high stakes than the 2 other fantasy books on this list so far, but I just absolutely loved it. So Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. And then the final book that I want to talk about for my favourites of 2023 is Harrow the Ninth. This is the second book in the Locked Tomb trilogy. I believe it's going to be a trilogy or Locked Tomb series. I loved Gideon the Ninth when I read it. I read it last year, I believe, or maybe 2 years ago, and I loved Harrow the Ninth even more. So this is a sci-fi story, and honestly the plot is really, really hard to explain and to sum up. But basically you are in this solar system of 9 planets, and each of the 9 planets have a specific type of necromancy that they are experts in. And you're following people on the 9th planet, or the 9th house. So the first book is about Gideon and the second book is following Harrow. But honestly, the plots of these are very confusing, but in the most fun way. The first one is more of a closed door mystery story, whereas the second one I think just expands the plot and the world a lot more, and I think that's probably why I loved it even more than Gideon, even though I loved Gideon the Ninth. I love our characters. I love the angst and the pain and the witty humour and how horrible and nasty they are, but still so full of love. I'm just absolutely obsessed with this series, and I cannot wait to read None of the Ninth. I've just got it for Christmas, so I cannot wait to pick that up as soon as possible. But I would really say, if you're interested in lesbian necromancers in space, then this series is a must read for you. So there we have it. I can't believe I finally managed to narrow down my favourite books to a top 5, but I'm very happy with the final list that I've got. I just knocked the camera down, so you're going to get a very different angle now, but there we have it. I'm so pleased that I finally managed to narrow down the books and choose my top 5 for 2023. I absolutely adore all of these books, for very different reasons as well, but they are all going to be in my all-time favourites from now on. Please let me know if you've read any of these and what you thought. But don't be shy to tell me that you hated them as well. I like opinions, so give me yours. And if you know what your top favourites for the year of 2023 were, then please let me know that as well, because I'd be very interested to see. And I also always want more recommendations. But I really hope that you've enjoyed this video as much as I have enjoyed making it. And if you have not subscribed already, then please subscribe because it means so much to me. But I will talk to you again soon. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!